One of the things about being in private practice is that as you grow, things can start to get complicated. And one of the things you'll probably figure out you need pretty quickly is a good electronic health record system. TherapyNotes is the number one provider of electronic health record systems for mental health providers. It's what I use in my practice, and I can highly recommend them. So I invite you to go over and check them out. Go over to therapynotes.com, and then if you'll use the coupon code Gordon, Gordon, you can get 2 months free. That's a great deal. So go check them out today, therapynotes.com. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 81 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me for the podcast and letting me into your ears, into your life, listening in. I hope this podcast, as always, is helpful to you in some way and just thinking about your private practice journey. As I'm recording this, we're getting ready to start the Memorial Day weekend, and so I'm just always excited for the unofficial start to summer, and boy, does it feel like summer already here in East Tennessee. We're going to be getting up into the 90s this weekend, which is just unheard of this early in the summer or early in the season. I dread to think what it's going to be like in July if this trend continues. It's just it's something else. But I do love being outside. I was before I came in to record this and get this podcast episode ready, I was out in my yard and I was mowing and just geeking out on some podcast episodes, listening to some different podcasts that I love to listen to. I probably ought to share a list of the podcasts I listen to with you. But a lot of them you might be familiar with. Of course, my friend Joe Sanok at Practice of the Practice, and then Melvin Varghese and Selling the Couch, and Kate and Katie with the Startup Nation, Startup Private Practice Startup. Sorry about that, Kate and Katie. But there's just a whole list of those in the therapist experience with the folks at Brighter Vision. And, there's just lots of great stuff out there. And the whole reason I'm doing this podcast is just kind of give my spin on it. And the selfish reason is I get to talk to a lot of great people and get to have a lot of neat conversations. Speaking of which, we've got a great one today. I'm so happy that Marissa Lawton is coming on, and I'm going to introduce her to you here in just a moment. I did want to say again that the Money Matters in Private Practice course is ready for you. And I want you to go over and take a look at that. Just go over to practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. I changed the URL on that, or just changed the way you get to it. It just made more sense. So practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. And if you're really in the situation, kind of like I was, and when I first went into private practice, I just had a lot of questions about the financial side of private practice, and had to learn a lot the hard way. And so I've put this course together. It's nearly or over 6 hours worth of material in terms of videos. I've got 10 different lessons just covering everything from just some basic accounting principles that I think everybody needs to know, to how to set your fees, to setting up business entities, talking about creating a financial plan. Also talk a great deal about profit first and how you can implement that in your practice. And there's lots of bonus material in there as well. So I would invite you to go over and take a look at that course. I've put a lot of work into that, and really with the intent of helping you out And so take a look at that. practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. So today's guest is Marissa Lawton, and I'm so happy to have her with me. Marissa is another one of us in this whole consulting coaching space for private practice building, and Marissa comes to this with a little different perspective. She's got a background in business, and that's what she got her undergraduate degree in. And what we're going to be talking about is just some, I like to refer to it as some unconventional business models, or really kind of thinking outside the box about how you want to go about running your practice. We had talked a little bit before we started recording just about how most of us in graduate school tend to go through this idea that we go in and get our clinical training and then we go to work somewhere, whether it be at an agency or working for somebody else. But there are a lot of different ways to think about that. So that's what Marissa and I talk about today. So without further ado, boy, my tongue is tied today. Without further ado, this is Marissa Lawton. Hello again, folks, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I'm so happy and excited to have with me today Marissa Lawton. And Marissa, and I'm not sure exactly how we connected, Marissa, but I know it was online. And Marissa is another one of these great people to get to know. She's in this whole consulting space, and I love hearing her story and just how she's kind of landed on what she has in this whole private practice journey. And she's going to share some more of that with us. So I'm excited to have you here, Marissa.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize to the listeners really quick. I'm a military spouse, which plays a role in my story. But I'm in a hotel right now because we are in the middle of a cross-country move. So you may hear some noises. I had to go down to the lobby to get a good connection. So you may hear transient people or whatever. So forgive my audio.
That's the fun about doing these podcasts is we just go for it and get real. So,
yeah.
So, well, thanks, Marissa, for joining me today. So, why don't you, I'll start with you just like I do everybody else. Tell us about your private practice journey and kind of how you've landed where you are and the things you're doing now.
Yeah, I have a very different path than most, I would say. My undergrad is actually in corporate finance and marketing. Wow. So I did not study psychology. I did not study sociology or any of that stuff that is normally how people get to the field. But again, like I said, I'm a military spouse, which just plays a huge role. I graduated from undergrad and I was working in the corporate area, like corporate arena, for about a year. My husband and I had been high school sweethearts and kind of took a break for college, and that's when he joined the Army. We were in an on-again period and got orders to Alaska. And so it wasn't something that we could do long distance anymore. The flights were too long and too expensive. And so we decided to kind of commit to the relationship, and I moved to Alaska. Needless to say, there's no corporate banks or anything there. Like, we were lucky to have one credit union in our tiny community. So that really got me to do some soul searching. I call it my quarter life crisis. Mm-hmm. And that's where I found therapy for myself, but also as a profession.
Yes.
And so my husband ended up deploying to Afghanistan, and that's when I got my grad degree. I said, if I'm going to be alone, I might as well make the most of this. And so, did all my studying while he was deployed. And then we ended up moving to Georgia, and that's where I completed all my stuff for licensure. Wow. And it's interesting. I have not yet had a private practice. So it is in my dreams. When I had finished all my stuff and was finally independently licensed, it was time to move again. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, I took my work online and I started doing some coaching and some consulting and found my way to doing that work for therapists. So when we settle, it is definitely still in my goals and dreams to open a small clinical practice. But I still see this online income stream as being a big part of my income and also the way that I make an impact on the world. I feel if I can help therapists build the businesses that they love, their clients are going to be served better. And ultimately, my impact spreads that way.
Right. Yeah, I love that because, I am all about being able to kind of think about things in unconventional ways and thinking outside the box. And I think as we were talking about before we started recording is just, I think what gets kind of fed to us in grad school is that you get your degree, you get your license, and then you go to work for somebody else. And then there's some of us, like you said, that follow two trajectories, one, either the, rise up in management in the agency world, or you go out on your own. And what I loved about what you were talking about ahead of time, and I'm going to get you to elaborate more on this, is that there are more choices than that. And so I think that's what I think people would be interested in.
Yeah. So the big choice that I help people make is do you want to replicate that model and go towards creating a group practice on your own? And if so, how do we market that and brand it and all of that fun stuff? Or do you want to, be more self-reliant and create an income stream on your own? And the way that I help people do that is through the online income stream, which is exactly what I do: the coaching, the consulting, maybe a course or a group program, whatever that could look like for you, and make sense for you. I think one of the big things is, even in a group practice, you're still really in that one-to-one business model, right? It's butts in chairs. Somebody's sitting on the couch exchanging a set amount of money for an hour of your time. So naturally, therapeutically, we can go to a therapy group and we change from the one to many model, where we're doing an anger management group or a social skills group or DBT group or something like that. We can replicate that in an online model where you might be doing a group coaching program for one to many, and serving people all over the world or all over the country. So there's just so many different alternatives now. It doesn't just have to be that one business model that we're most familiar with. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really one of the things that really kind of pushed me to start doing the practice of therapy stuff, is I realized that number one is that, none of us, you're fortunate in that you've got a background of business. You've got that core stuff. Most of us in this clinical world have none of that. And so, having to learn those different ways to peel the potato, so to speak. Yeah. And so,
And I think in my work, that is the biggest mindset shift that I help people see, is that a lot of therapists, even if they're in private practice, they still don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. And starting a practice is owning your business. You're very much becoming a business owner at that point. And so some people I work with have just that bug, that entrepreneurial bug, and they're like, what's next? What's next?
Yes.
But also, if they don't necessarily have the bug, or if they don't necessarily have the business background, they're still coming at these walls of, well, what do I do now? Or how do I grow my income? And sometimes it just takes some simple reframes to help them see that there's different ways to do that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, there was, I had on a previous episode, I got the pleasure, had Melvin Varghese on here. And for any of us that listen to podcasts, particularly in this space, people know Selling the Couch and Melvin pretty well because he's been around for a while. But that was one of the things that we talked about is, I think there are a lot of people out there that really, they don't really aspire to have a group practice necessarily, or have this large thing that they're controlling. I mean, again, it's just kind of like, they're replicating the agency model,
right?
But they really want to scale and really want to increase their ability to increase their income and all of that. So with that in mind, what are some ideas or what are some things that you've been able to help people with and trying to figure out that course and that path?
Yeah. So again, like I said, the first thing I think is that mindset, like embracing the idea that you're an entrepreneur. I think sometimes we, especially coming from like a clinical background, we equate entrepreneur meaning like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, these people who are creating these big, giant corporation type companies and are going to step on the little guy in order to get where they're going. And, that's only one type of entrepreneur. We actually call those achievement entrepreneurs. But there's 4 categories. And I think that therapists can often fall into one or two of the others, which is a social entrepreneur, someone whose calling through their business is to make a better world.
Right.
Or also a lifestyle entrepreneur, someone who wants to be a business owner because they want more time or more freedom or more whatever. And so when we can get behind that idea that there's different types of entrepreneurship, it can be this freedom or this open door for us to be like, relax into that identity a bit and to say, oh, you mean being a business owner isn't like I'm not the scum of the earth or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So in many ways, what you're talking about is kind of developing what a lot of people refer to as a side hustle. Yeah. And so, so what in the folks that you've worked with so far, what are some ideas to throw out there that people are finding successful and kind of looking at ways to diversify their income? And
I love this question. I have 3 really good examples. Okay. I'll try and be brief. If I'm going on, you just stop me. But 2 of them are do couples work, and one of them does individual work. A client of mine who is now moving into coaching. So a lot of people are like, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? The biggest way that I can explain this is coaching solves a specific problem. And so my example of this is my client, she's up in Massachusetts and she does traditional couples counseling and she uses EFT. So a lot of attachment work, a lot of that kind of stuff. And in her coaching, what we did is we created a 3-month coaching package, so 90 days. And all she's doing in this coaching package is solving the problem of the couples who fight. So the first 30 days of that coaching package is let's figure out what you do when you guys are in a knockdown, drag out fight to just stop arguing at that moment. Like, how can we stop the fight where it is? From day 30 to day 60, they're working on some de-escalation strategies. Like, okay, how do we keep this from turning into a knockdown, drag out fight? And then from day 60 to 90, all they're doing is figuring out how do we stop this from turning into a fight in the first place. So by the end of 90 days, the couple is hopefully fighting a little bit less. They're not talking about family of origin. They're not processing, oh, he's securely attached and she's ambivalent, and that's why these fights are coming. That's therapy.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a really good example. She's just solving a specific problem for a specific type of couple.
Right.
I have another couples counselor who has created a course. So instead of coaching, and what she's taking a look at is that that pursuer avoider thing that couples do. And over 8 weeks, she teaches couples what is a pursuer and avoider, How do you identify what role you have in that? And then she gives 7 weeks of strategies for them to hopefully come together and be more on the same page by the end of the course.
Wow.
So it's just like, it's kind of like psycho ed.
Yes. Right. I love that. Yeah.
And then my third example is somebody who works with individuals, and she's a DBT expert. And so in her practice, she's seeing a lot of borderline clients, a lot of things like that DBT works really, really well for. And she's working on creating a membership site. She actually happens to be, I think she's 10 years sober herself. She has quite a length of time in her recovery journey. And so in her membership site, what she's doing is she's helping other people on their sobriety path have an alternative to 12-step. And so she's taking just these tiny, minute DBT skills like Dear Man. And she just teaches that skill and then has a coaching call talking to people about how they can use that skill in their sobriety. So again, it's not therapy. They're not processing why they're using or processing, all the stuff on how to get sober or why to get sober. She's just taking a minute piece of like psycho ed, teaching a skill, and then getting on a coaching call with a group of people talking about how that skill can help them stay sober. Right.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me, Marissa, is it's almost like a niche inside of a niche. That's just really focused. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what helps something sell. When it's another conversation, but when you're talking about, okay, now how do I make money from this? Is you solve a very specific problem and you can articulate what that problem is and how you solve it. That's what sells something.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that a lot of my listeners have been hearing from me. I've been working on this Money Matters in Private Practice course that I've put together. And here's the thing about all this stuff, and I'm maybe letting in on a little bit of a secret. Every bit of the stuff that's in that course you can find online for free.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. But what people are interested in is to be able to cut to the chase and to have it condensed into one little thing to be able to, and they're willing to pay for it. And so that's, so I think that same principle would apply when we think about our different niches and with our ideal clients and who we work with and all of that. There's a potential there to just kind of package that in such a way that people would be really willing to buy it, because the other, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, you've got me going, is that there are probably there's a big segment of the population out there that has no desire whatsoever to dig into that internal stuff. They just want to know how to solve the problem. So I think being able to tap into those kind of markets. Really huge.
The big thing that we need to, when we're talking about maintaining a clinical practice and adding something on the side, like you mentioned, a side hustle, is we need to make the distinction between a client and a customer. So a client is somebody who, whether you are private pay or take insurance, it's still somebody who qualifies for a diagnosis. Right. And a customer is somebody who is not like it would not be a clinical client. They don't qualify for a diagnosis, but they're still spending, their afternoons in the self-help aisle in Barnes & Noble, right? They're still wanting to self-actualize. They're still wanting to improve their life. They're a great candidate for a course or for coaching or for a group online program or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I love these ideas, Marissa, and I hope the folks listening are they're getting pumped up like I am about it, because I've got my wheels turning and spinning lots of different directions to go with this. So if you don't mind, let's switch gears a little bit.
Totally.
I know one of your other areas of expertise is in marketing and helping clinicians kind of figure out a brand and a way to get their name out there. Which ultimately brings us more clients and customers now. And so tell folks a little bit about that. And in particular, and this is a question I get a lot from people, is why they should be blogging.
Perfect.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So the idea that you just mentioned a little bit ago about the niche or niche, however you want to say it, it's kind of funny. They're cliche or whatever, but the riches are in the niches and stuff like that. Like there's reasons that marketers say these phrases because there's two really big elements of making money, of marketing, of making sales, right? And it's hard for us to think of therapy as a commodity, of like something that's being sold. So that can kind of feel a little silly or like iffy sometimes. But we just want to think of the person who is scheduling with you, they're hiring you. So they are a consumer of therapy, right? They're choosing which person they want to spend money with, right? So if we can kind of all get on the same page around that, when you can speak to one specific person in your marketing, which is a niche, right? When you can identify their pains, we also want to identify their gains. Like, what did they gain from that book from Barnes & Noble? Like, did they maybe make a slight advancement in their concern? Like, that's great to celebrate. So we want to be able to talk to their pains. We want to be able to talk to their gains. And we also want to be able to talk to their obstacles, like what's keeping them from gaining or from getting better. And by having a persona that represents that, a niche that represents that, we can talk to those three elements so much better than when we're trying to talk to everybody. Right. When you talk to everybody, you end up really kind of talking to nobody because you have to be so general with your statements that it doesn't resonate with anybody.
Right. It just more noise. Yeah.
So that's the first element, is the niche, right? And then when you have a niche and a brand, it's like a power punch. There's no better marketing combo than that. Yeah. And so the brand is actually made up of three parts. It's who you serve, so that niche, it's the element, but how you serve them and why you serve them. So a really great example that I use that really seems to drive this point home is, political primaries. And I'm not going to get political, don't worry, but just an idea. When we're thinking about the political primary, right, we have a two-party system. We have the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. When everybody is at that Democratic primary and they're all on, the same stage, we can make some general assumptions about them because they're all quote unquote Democrats, right? So presumably they're kind of in the same category. But then as we listen to them more, one starts talking about taxes, one starts talking about education, one starts talking about infrastructure, whatever their platform is. And as we listen to these people speaking, that's how we decide who's going to we vote for them at that stage, and we decide who's going to represent the party, right? So you can take that same analogy when somebody is looking at therapy websites or when they're picking a therapist. They can make some general assumptions about therapists because they're all on that same stage. I'm going to talk to them. We're going to talk about my issue and I'm going to get better, right? We can think about that. But then some therapist starts talking about, CBT, and some therapist starts talking about a different modality, Gestalt, whatever. When you start talking about who you serve, how you serve them, and why, it lets that consumer start to whittle down and vote for you. And in this case, it's not a ballot they're voting on. They're voting with their dollar.
Right.
So that's really like a really great way to conceptualize this. If I was having a campaign about what I believe about therapy and how change happens and how transformation happens and why I like to work with this certain population, that's your campaign. That's your platform.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love those analogies. And it's really, really helping people find the person that's the best fit for them. And I know you know Allison Pereira.
Yeah.
And, Allison talks about that, and just the fact that marketing is really more about helping people find you and connecting with you than it is selling anything.
Oh, absolutely. And I see it from two sides, because if you're creating a market message that's really congruent for you, really feels great for who you are, you feel better saying it, right? You feel better introducing yourself. You feel better writing your website or whatever. And you're also going to do the work that you're meant to do. We've all had those clients in session where we're like watching the clock tick. We're like, is it done yet? Is it done yet?
Yeah.
And then we've all had those clients where it's like, you're just instantly there and you're in that flow the whole session. And there's no really way to talk about it unless you've felt it, right? We all can like conjure that. Don't we want more of that?
Yeah.
Right? Don't we want a casebook full of that?
Yeah.
So,
and it makes us better therapists too, to be able to work with the people that energize us the most. And so, yeah, absolutely. Boy, Marissa, we could go in so many directions here, but I want to be mindful of your time. And I'm so glad that you joined me on the podcast today. But tell folks a little bit more about how they can get in touch with you, and a little bit more about your consulting and things that you're into.
Yeah. So if you guys like listening to podcasts, I presume since you are here, I have one of my own. It's called Empathy Rising. My whole brand is that empathy and success don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can be effective helpers and effective business owners, and we can make the income that we want to make through impacting people. And so the way I help you do this is just thinking about alternative business streams. So whether that's like hosting workshops in person, maybe you and a yoga teacher get together and host something and charge a $50 ticket and it's another income stream, or doing something online. That's really what I'm about, is thinking about these alternatives. Yeah, that's cool. How can people get in touch with you? Yeah, so my website is just my name, super easy, marissalawton.com. Good. And we'll put all this in the show notes, show summary, and so people can get in touch with you. Well, Marissa, I hope we could do this again. I'd love to catch back up with you, and good luck with your move. Yeah, thank you. I'd love to have you on my show too. We can talk about We can definitely do that. Do that. So, okay. Well, thanks, Marissa, again for joining me. And folks, do check out her stuff, marissalawton.com. Thanks, Marissa. Thank you so much. Well, didn't you just love listening to Marissa? I could listen to her all day just talking about these things. I really kind of geek out on a lot of this stuff because, one of the things that I learned a few years ago is just kind of this whole concept that Marissa has been talking about, really just kind of thinking about alternative business models and different ways to kind of monetize what you do. And the other thing too, and I'll talk about this some in the course, and just the necessity of just diversifying your income. If we've got income coming in from multiple different places, it just makes things much more steady and much more diverse in a way. And so that's I think that's the whole point here with what Marissa is saying, is just to really think outside the box about what you do and how you can do that in a way that's going to maximize the time that you spend on it, but also bring you some income with that. And those are just alternative business models. So, boy, thanks again to Marissa for being on the podcast today. Do go and check out today's sponsor, Therapy Notes. You can find them over at TherapyNotes.com. And if you'll use the coupon code Gordon, you can get 2 months free of their services. And they're who I use in my practice. So check them out today. Also, be sure and go over and check out the Money Matters in Private Practice course. And you can find that at practiceoftherapy.com/moneymatters.
And finally, too, go and check out Marissa's information. The information will be in the show notes there with links to her website and also her podcast. I'm looking forward to subscribing to that and listening to that. And speaking of that, of which, go ahead while you're listening to the podcast to go over to your favorite podcatcher, wherever you might be listening to this, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And also leave us a review and give us a rating. I love to get those reviews, and it just helps boost the rankings of the podcast and makes it easier for people to find us. So thanks again, folks, for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend or whenever you might be listening to this. Take care. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.